Yeah, so this is me with slightly more hair. So I enjoyed engaging networks last summer. I specialise in email delivery and monitoring email traffic for all of our clients. So I'm client support, but I do that as a specific area. So if you do have issues, you can contact me and I can look into your email delivery for you. So what we do at Engaging Networks, we operate as an email service provider. This is referred to often as ESP. And it's we monitor, as well as that, we will monitor and manage your delivery across our servers. So, like if you're an email service client, which you all obviously are, we'll monitor all of your sender profiles and see what's happening with them in terms of like how they've been responded from by email providers and ISPs globally. We provide tools for you to deliver effective email campaigns. So obviously you will have seen our email builder tool. We sent 2.8 billion emails were sent by our clients in 2017. So our clients sending through our servers, that's a lot of emails. One day alone, Giving Tuesday, how many people sent emails on Giving Tuesday here? Just out of interest. So it's really more of an American thing. It's after Thanksgiving. So they have Black Friday and then Giving Tuesday, probably out of guilt for having spent so much money on televisions. But 35.7 million is a lot. Probably much more comparable for people in Europe and the UK is the end of year emails. That's a good donation ask, obviously. I know in certain regions, so I know when we're working with the Middle East, it's a good donation ask in December, potentially. I know we've had success there. So 36 million in basically 2 days, I think that was, basically the 30th, 31st of December. So a lot of emails. We obviously have to ramp up how we're working with the servers in those times and be much more vigilant on monitoring, which is a fun job on December 31st. So thanks everybody. What is deliverability? I'm sure all of you know this already. It's the demonstrable rate at which your emails land in inboxes. Really straightforward, very complicated in practice. It can be affected by anything from the content in your email. So what you're saying, the images you're using, the way you're using links, anything like that, to the email address you've sent from. Are you sending from jim@somewhere.com, or are you sending from webmaster or info@somewhere.com, for example? That's your sender profile. Also, how you've used that in the past will be observed by email service providers, and they'll react to it in different ways. And the people to which you're sending, probably the biggest thing, your subscriber list, the key item. And without a doubt, improving email deliverability is the most effective way to improve engagement with email campaigns. GDPR is going to be a massive thing, I'm sure, for you all this year. Many of our clients are currently resubscribing their supporters in asks and emails. Obviously, one of the parts of GDPR is making sure you've had a regular opt-in for the people you're emailing. So it basically reinforces stuff that people should have been doing anyway. Re-engagement campaigns are really important, and attrition and monitoring attrition has always been a key factor. We'll look into reasons why that is later, but I think with a lot of GDPR, it's just going to be doing stuff that would have been good to do anyway. But it might change the landscape for email delivery for like more time, more this year than we've seen in recent history, I think, really.
How do you expect it to change?
Well, I mean, it depends what sort of subscriber list you're working with and how engaged your subscribers are, but typically you will have a large part of an email subscriber list won't have clicked or opened something for a long period of time. I can't advise specifically on the legality of GDPR. I'm just a client support guy, but like I know that one of the things is having had a recent opt-in is a part of GDPR as I understand it, and I know that that's a lot of the asks I'm seeing from emails currently is asking people to engage back with an email. I got one from, I think, not an Engaging Networks client, but I got one from 38 Degrees the other day, and it was asking for a resubscription, effectively. So that's what I think. People potentially losing parts of their databases, I think, is a big concern for people. That will happen. So that's the thing. If you're cleaning, you're potentially. It's always the thing I think with the charity sector is that like this sort of like push-pull between having to say you have a large amount of people and being able to actually effectively engage those people. So if you are doing re-engagement campaigns and you are using your attrition rate as you should be, like you're not going to be pulling in as large numbers, but your open rates and click-throughs are going to be much more healthy, and you're going to be able to learn a lot more from them. You'll notice if you're, and we'll talk a bit more on this later, but if you're segmenting emails properly and you're using your highly engaged groups, for example, you'll notice how much you can learn more about how they're opening or clicking through on emails than if you were sending a blast to everyone. It's very hard to get like a big enough division in an open rate to actually learn anything from, say, a split test, if that makes sense. So what we're going to cover today is like these areas. So we'll look at inbox placement using welcome emails, key, email templates and testing. We'll look at a little bit of segmentation, seed lists. How many people here are using a seed list? Nobody? Okay, good. Good that it's there then. So you can learn so much from a seed list, I can't even tell you. Bounces and suppressions, we'll look at our specific criteria for bounces and suppressions and what different things are. Spam traps, anybody here know what spam traps are? Okay, good again. You're in the right place then. Data hygiene, which is really these two are key together. Some further reading from our sponsors, Care2, but it's a really good book, so you'll be interested in it. And then some technical stuff that I don't want to focus too much on because it'll bore you guys to tears and you'll all phase out. So we're looking at inbox placement. Any of the questions on this would be really interesting. I know I spoke with Habib a little bit about this yesterday. We'll look more on the seeds list later. But there's different types of inbox placement effectively. You don't want to end up in the spam folder, obviously, the worst possible thing. And the other thing is tracking how you're ending up in a spam folder and whether you are or not. Your test emails won't show this generally. Sometimes they will, but usually if you're just sending a test email to yourself, it won't tell you that you're ending up in spam. It'll just go to your inbox because that's one email. You really have to be like simulating, well not simulating, but sending it as part of a group to see how the provider is reacting to that. The inbox, obviously, that's where you want to be. Secondary folders, again, not really where you want to be. So looking here, we've got Gmail and Outlook. Gmail, as we know, uses the primary and promotional folders. You'll know this. What you might not know, and it's fairly new, is that Outlook.com/Hotmail, you know, the difference between Outlook.com and Hotmail, they're still slightly divided. Not necessarily exactly the same thing, but we're talking about Hotmail for these purposes. They used a focused and other folder now. I think the other folder is actually much more hidden than Gmail's promotional folder. And I think you really, like, it's kind of grayed out in the interface. I think it's really not very obvious what it is. I think it's like more sinister even than the promotional folder is, and it's not somewhere you want to be. And I think it is where most charities are probably ending up now. So you want to have ways to mitigate that. Currently, fortunately, AOL and Yahoo still don't have those, which is good. They're obviously going to be your 4 big providers. So yeah, I mean, obviously Gmail and Hotmail are the biggest, but at least Yahoo and AOL aren't doing that currently. This is key into improving your inbox placement is avoiding complaints, obviously. Don't send the same content to people multiple times. Don't harass your subscriber list, obviously. And yeah, just, you know, I'm sure you'll know the sort of things that are like, because you'll do this sort of things yourself. What's likely to, like somebody to mark something as spam. Who does that? Who regularly here marks an email as spam? So what sort of things would annoy you if you were?
I'm horrible with all my emails.
Okay, so this is great. So you're perfect for this. So just tell us, like, what sort of thing would you find in an email where you go, like, you know what, that's going in spam? Like,
well, if there's like a template, for example,
yeah,
it goes straight to spam. If it's info at, team at, hello at.
Right. So these are really, really good examples. Yeah, and like providers hate that. So they hate when it's like info at whatever. That's why you want to be using much more personalized sender profiles, like you said, like we've spoken about briefly. But yes, templates and responsive design. If you're not using a responsive template, that's key. I think that's what you were sort of talking about, or if it looks bad, if you're not testing it on every different device, every different webmail client, every different Outlook, you've got to test on Outlook, not Outlook.com. This is Outlook, the desktop platform, because that is the one that usually causes the most problems. It has the most different versions. They all react differently, and they all have their own quirks, and they all don't like certain types of code. So one certainly that you have to keep a strong eye on. And this is really something. If you take away something from this page, getting added to trusted lists. It's always been the case that you want to be added to contacts. So it used to be the ask is that with the full name providers, you would do a right click and you would say add to contacts, right? And that would much more likely get you out of the spam folder and keep you in the inbox. If your subscribers were adding you to their contacts list, you get really good inbox placement. Now, as we go back with like Gmail and Hotmail / Outlook, you want to, it's when it's in other, you want to be moving it to focused. So that's the kind of the equivalent now. And in Gmail the same. There's an option for moving promotional to primary. The more of your subscribers are doing that, the more likely you are to land in the inbox rather than that secondary folder. And your open rates will go soaring up from that. Just because you guys use these services yourself, so you know how you use them, and you're much more likely to click on something or open something that's in your inbox as opposed to anything else.
How would you do that? Like, would you ask people to?
Right, so we're just about to get to that. It's almost as if this was planned. So welcome emails are a really good. So that's actually sort of a lower item here, but they're the perfect place for an add to contacts ask because the engagement is so high. When you've got like 10% of people opening your email and you're doing an ask to add to contacts, and like people 1% are clicking through on that, it's such a low engagement that you're only getting, and you get most of your, you were talking about subscriber lists where a lot of people have in reality disengaged a long time ago. So why would you be doing that add to contacts ask? And you might annoy people more than anything else. People are most engaged when they've just come to your organization or they've just done something. Maybe they've donated for the first time. Maybe they've just maybe they've just gone into a campaign that you're doing in the run up to Christmas. And that's, they're the most interested to hear about what you got to say. The highest point of engagement is, I was amazed by this. I've seen a lot of welcome series and I've seen them around the 50% mark for opens, / sort of as high as 25% for click-through. But I've never seen 81% open and 56% click-through. That's a charity sector email, the source is Destra, so pretty good. This is Experian, so not charity sector, but this is their emails. So they're a finance organization, but a really good example again. I would say those are fairly typical open rates and click-through, if not quite good. But that's their welcome stuff. It's huge. So if you'll have your welcome email, and you'll have your content, your best content in there, obviously, welcome people to the organization. But consider as an ask in that email to be added to contacts. As a lot of the time, in a welcome email, they may not be a specific ask. And it doesn't have to be a big ask, but I think it's a really good place to put it. I think you're going to find that your long-term inbox placement will improve as a result of that. But also, welcome series, they will, if you're grabbing people at the start with a good welcome series or a good welcome email, then the churn rate, or has people heard of this? Churn rate, attrition rates? Has anybody heard of these things? It's the amount of people who are unsubscribing basically against the amount of days in a month, and then you can get your monthly churn rate. But this is key for email. It's key for keeping a hygienic data, like a hygienic subscriber list. And if those first 3 months are key, if you are engaging people in those first 3 months, then they're with a better welcome series and better content, then they're much more likely to be reading yourself 6 months to a year down the line. You'll notice in engaging networks we have an engagement scoring. In long-term reports, we have an engagement scoring system up to a score of 11, and we rank that over 3 months periods. And it's a good way of gauging how many of your contacts are in different parts of the engagement scoring. Is a really good way to know how your attrition rate is going. If you've got if you've got a really large volume who have only opened an email in the last 12 months, for example, And a large volume, really, so that'd be a score of, I believe it's 10. And then a score of 11 is not having done anything in quite a while. Then, you should be thinking about your attrition rate and your churn. Responsive templates. Who's done testing on how many people are using mobiles with, So have you found anything similar to this? This is return path. So they're pretty much the gold standard in email delivery research. They do sender score. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of sender score. We'll touch on that later. So this figure is really interesting. So 76% in Great Britain, a lot higher than the US and Canada, are opening their emails on mobile. That's across everything. That's across like everything return path will be monitoring, and they'll be monitoring more people than pretty much anybody else. 14% webmail, so that's your Hotmails and so on, and Gmail. And then desktop, that'll be majority Outlook for desktop. And they're very low. What's interesting is how people potentially are, and what's not showing here is how people engage differently with those emails on those different platforms. Are people using desktop more likely to just glance at your email, or are they more likely to give it a proper read than they are on mobile? It's a good question. I think like something worth looking at. Email and Acid gives you good, we'll touch on email and Acid later, but that gives you good kind of metrics for that if you're interested to look into it. And obviously this has changed a lot in the last 5 years. Mobile was only 20% of the market, according to that, in 2012. So a vast change. That's across multiple countries, obviously, not just the UK. So what we have for this, again, we're going back to our software. So we talked a little bit about these sample templates earlier, so you were working with them, I think, a bit. If you don't know if your templates are responsive, it's worth testing that. There are tools in engaging networks we'll talk about later. There are also other professional tools we'll talk about that provide this service. And if you want to be seeing that your templates are looking good across all browsers, devices, platforms, but B, that they're looking good on mobile. And we have got these sample templates now in our new email builder that provide that for you. There's a lot of pros to that. It's easy to build and edit a new template. You can use these editable regions to add different sections, so text with image, calls to action. These all come with a placeholder image, but you can just chuck in your own logo. You can go a little bit further into the code and change background colors if you want, but you should be able to use one of these sample templates and be up and running with a template that's well tested across devices and platforms, mobile ready within a day, really. So that's why they're there. They're worth having a look at. You can also chuck in your own templates to the email builder and make it much more easy for anybody who doesn't have specific coding knowledge or just technical knowledge to be up and running and working with editing text, editing images. And it's like the interface is done as Page Builder is, so it's much more consistent with the rest of engaging networks. And another benefit is that when you're using your templates, you'll know that you have to constantly be testing them and to make sure that, because providers change their parameters with coding and parameters of what they're accepting and how they're rendering things over the course of a year, you have to constantly test to make sure they're looking fine. And obviously if you're using ours, then we're doing that for you. So it's a product that we are providing. So we have that responsibility to be providing a sample template that's worth up to industry spec. So worth having a look at if you're worried about your template. Definitely worth testing your template because, as we've seen, a bad template might be the first thing that switches off a subscriber potentially. So key areas again for deliverability. Testing your emails. We do have tools in the software for testing this. So right now, we have the email preview tool. You'll see this just before you're sending. It's the monitor here on the left-hand side. When you're in there, you'll see all of these devices you can test with. This is mostly, for the most part, this is emulating based on device width. You can get more complex emulations with other software. We'll talk a little bit about email and Acid and Litmus later, but what I know, speaking to Graham and seeing if you've seen his technology roadmap presentation in this community conference, one of the things he's talking about is in 2018, using the API from a provider such as Email and Acid or Litmus and using that for our email testing. So that'll be really exciting. You're going to get much more complex rendering and precise emulation of these different devices and the different platforms, etc. when you're sending out. But right now, I think this does a really good kind of like quick look just to check everything's looking fine on mobiles and tablets and in desktop just before you're sending out. I think that's fairly key. Segmentation. So this is a line I came up with when we walked home last night. I'm pretty proud of it. Email blasts are a thing of the past. I'm slightly rethinking that now. But yeah, how many people send regularly to their whole subscriber list at one time? Just out of interest. Yeah, and that's the 3 people that are omitting it. I know there's more. It's like a really common practice, I think. You obviously want to be getting the most traction for your campaigns as you can. And so the logic is by sending to as wide amount of people as possible, you're just going to get more clicks on the action potentially. I don't think this is just not always the case. Mail providers will notice if you're repeatedly sending the same content to the same amount of people regularly, and it's a large list and it's consistently the same people. It's not a practice they like, so they tend to penalise for it. As just an example, for like our UK clients, if you had a campaign or event such as a jog, a half marathon in London, do you want to be telling people in Scotland about that? Are you going to send an email to everybody in the whole of the UK about something that's happening in London, or really do you want to specify it down to the southeast or potentially just England? With that campaign, is it worth sending it to people who haven't done anything in terms of campaigning for the last 12 months, or should you really be just doing it with people who did the campaign last year, for example? Is a question, before you click on an email and send it, you just got to ask yourself, is adding all those people really going to improve your engagement that much? If it isn't, you're better off not sending to them, or you're better off segmenting them and sending them different content, depending on how they've engaged with you. Because email providers will like it, because you'll get better engagement from your users. So segmentation is another key area. Seed lists. So we talked about this earlier, and I think a lot of you said that you're not using seed lists. These are, in their simplest form, a set of mailboxes. I did this picture, by the way, just pretty proud of that. The set of mailboxes managed by the sender, designed to receive the sender's own campaign mail only. So, again, typically we'll have the 4 big providers, so AOL, Yahoo, Hotmail, Gmail. The way to do it is to set up a dummy account with each provider and then seed those accounts into your regular subscriber lists and make sure that they're basically being sent out to as part of all of your campaigns. There are different ways of doing that. You can set them out as a separate query, potentially in engaging networks. So you could just do a query that's just got those emails and then add that query to any send you're doing. Or you can just put them into your regular population and just make sure that they're opted into everything and they're in the high engagement group so that they're getting all of your emails. If they're being sent to with the whole group of, say, 50,000 people, they're going to get the same reactions from the main providers that all of your subscribers are seeing. And that's what you want to be able to see. That's how you're going to find out if you're landing in spam, or if you're landing in the primary or secondary folders, which is really what you want to be finding out. We run our own seed lists at Engaging Networks. Just in the we monitor traffic regularly, and it's something we can look into. If we would always recommend as a first step you setting up your own and being vigilant and testing that yourself. If it's something you're interested in, you should come and speak to us, and we can look at setting it up with you potentially. But the learnings are just, for something that's so easy to do, the learnings are incredibly far-reaching, and they, in the long term, are going to improve your placement, open rates, and click-through, which is really what you're aiming to do.
Question for you.
Sure.
What's the main difference between testing your email by sending it to different webmail clients?
Yeah.
The 2 mild renders, wetlands,
Yeah.
and using a seed list. My understanding of seed list is a list that will be part of your bigger list.
Exactly right.
List. but that's actually for the real send.
Yeah.
So we find it a little bit easier to test. Use, I mean,
just send a test email.
Yeah, send a test email to the main three web clients, main clients, and see if the email template is ready to go, rather than actually use a seed list and make it part of the campaign.
Yeah, I think
and then actually, if it lands in spam, there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. I mean, seed lists you want to be monitoring over time. So if you're just sending a test email, yes, you're right. They are very good for seeing rendering and just checking how it looks. They will not tell you about where you're landing in spam. They will only tell you that one email has successfully landed. When you send 20,000 emails to Hotmail at one time, they will go in a queue. They will be potentially deferred, depending on the traffic that's going to Hotmail at one time. But there's a lot of different behavior from the ISP servers that will determine exactly where your email's landing. And that's just never going to be the case with a single test send. You can still land in spam from a test send. Like, generally ISPs are grading you on your sender reputation, which is to do with your IP and your domain, and then your actual sender address. The sender and the address, we monitor the IP, the sender, the address, and the domain are down to you, really. But yeah, that's why you have to be seeding them into that full send, because there's just so many different things that happen. I will work with, on any given day, dozens of different error codes, which are showing, and there are literally thousands of these things that would just never happen when you send a test email out. And it's to do with conditions, timing, volume, and that's where the only way to simulate it is to seed it into the main thing. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But do you use the same IPs for sending the test email as, is it like dedicated IP for testing?
Your test email will go through this. Yeah. The IP is the same. The sender address is the same. The domain is the same. The difference is like volume, how you're being treated with volume. That's what I say with some test emails, you will still land in spam. If you've been a naughty boy, then you're like, you can still land in spam for a test email. But really, like, Hotmail's going to be looking at the 20,000 emails it's just got from this IP, rather than like the one email. That's going to creep in much more easily. They obviously deal with billions of these things every day, so they have to grade it by importance. And set rules that don't, set rules effectively that don't affect your mate who's just emailing you. Like, that's the worst thing that can happen for a provider, is the fact that Sam can't get his email to John because they think that Sam is a multinational corporation. Those are why they set those kind of rules. Yeah, sure.
So in that case, how reliable are seed lists? So if I set up 20 dummy emails for providers, and I actively open each email that I send to myself, wouldn't that skew the way the provider will see that email from myself?
Not.
I always open it.
By an infinitesimal amount, yes. You always want to be doing your own little bit, but it's why if you're doing an ask for a trusted list, for example, what I was telling you earlier about being added to contacts, one person doing that isn't going to change everything. But over a course of 3 months, 20,000 people doing it will. And it's the same with open rates in click-through. Over time, with good practice and working at this and making sure you're constantly on top of it, it'll make a difference, but one person's never going to. It's like environmentalism, really. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, but what I see,
yeah.
That will lead me to change the template or something that doesn't, or tell me where the email will end up.
Yeah.
How can I use the test list as a valid way to understand where the emails are going to?
Right, because if you're on that seed list and you've got that seed account, and also when you're testing, you'll be sending your test to your personal account. If you've got a seed list set up, that would say like seed@yahoo.com. Then you'll be getting like the placement in there that's like the same as probably the majority of your users are seeing. If you're landing in spam with your seed list, it probably means most of your supporters are too, but you're never going to see that with a test usually. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is a slightly different area, so it's the same, broadly the same thing, but bounces and suppressions are like the real hard end of the scale in terms of inbox placement in the sense that there isn't any for anyone. Does everybody here know the difference between a soft bounce and a hard bounce? Okay, soft bounce is if you run out of mail message quota in your inbox. Somebody's got too many email messages, so they bounce. They do what's called a soft bounce. That's not the fault of the sender. That's the fault of the person's inbox. Similarly, if they have an out of office, that's a soft bounce. A hard bounce is actually just been blocked at the server for a number of reasons. There are all of these reasons why you'd be hard bounced at the server, and then you're not going to get any inbox placement at all. You won't land in spam. You won't land in a secondary folder. You won't land in an inbox. There's different types of hard bounce. So has anybody seen this list? So these are our policies for sending. So the big ones, in terms of like getting what's called blacklisted by provider, are spam-related or content-related bounces. These are actually set to like an infinite level for us. The reason for that is like you may do 10 emails that have no spammy content, and then you might do one that is. One bounce because of spam content doesn't mean that we should be suppressing your email. So what do we do suppress for is bad mailbox and bad domain. So that means if you've got something like gmail.com or like gmail.com or hitmail rather than hotmail, that will typically return a hard bounce with bad mailbox or bad domain. And like those are things you don't want. They potentially spring spam traps, but they're obviously not a real email address. They never are. They were talking about typo email addresses or fake email addresses. They're potentially quite problematic, but they're obviously something that's not going to be valuable for you. So as soon as that happens, we suppress that email as part of our own policies. There's other items here. Message expiration. Often you'll get deferred. If an ISP goes down, it may defer emails. Over a certain period of time, those deferrals may be expired. Again, a reason why we wouldn't suppress that immediately. We can go into more details with you personally if you like, but not something that we hide. Obviously, this is fairly standard industry procedure. You can manage your bounce lists. You can also manage your suppression lists in engaging networks. They're actually still in the legacy pages currently. So if you go into reports, you'll see bounce reports, and that has a hard and a soft bounce report, which you can download a CSV of. It also has your suppression report. All of those suppressed emails, they're all kept on your account. So if you have 100,000 supporters engaging networks, it's possible 5,000 of them could actually be on your suppression list. Worth checking, worth keeping up to date with. You can get rid of those supporters if you want to. And the reason you might want to is, does anybody here send to, say, 20,000 people, and the email always ends up being about 1,000 less than what they sent to? Does anybody have that at all? So it's a fairly common thing, and the reason for that is because you'll have 1,000 people on your suppression list. As part of the query that you send to, we do include the suppression list, like a number from people who will be on the suppression list, but they're never going to get the email sent to them in the end. This tells you effectively about the stuff that's never going to be delivered, have zero deliverability. So you should be keeping on top of these lists and just seeing what numbers you have and why over periods of time. We can investigate this for you as well if it's something you're concerned about. Types of spam traps. So I think we spoke a little bit about these. These are the things you absolutely don't want to end up on. Pure spam traps. These are honeypot email addresses designed to dupe spammers. There are third-party spam lists, things like Spamhaus or SpamCop. They provide data to email providers and ISPs on people who are doing bad email practice, and they crawl the internet, and it's why people should avoid large paid-for subscription lists. Paying for large subscription lists that they can't really validate where that's from. If you're doing that, you're more likely to get a list that's got things like pure spam traps on it, and these are things that are created by either third-party lists or Hotmail or whoever, and they're fake email addresses that are controlled by that organization just to be caught by someone. And if you end up sending to that, it's instantly, like even once, it's gonna mess up your deliverability and mess up your inbox placement. That can put you in a spam folder, like as quick as anything else. And it's the same here with recycled email addresses. This is a practice, perhaps in the last 5 years or so, that's becoming more prevalent. Everybody here will have a Hotmail or a Gmail account that they haven't touched for 2 years, I expect. Do any of you have that? You changed your account, you just left it. Typically what the providers will do is they keep those accounts open and they see when the last time the person engaged with that account. They haven't engaged with it for 2 years, but there's still some people emailing those accounts, charities, organizations, companies, and there's still people emailing that account and asking for engagement, but nobody's touched it for 2 years. Then that's a really bad sign to an email service provider. Effectively, another type of spam trap, and they will use that data to punish you quite severely. Something that if this is why you really need a re-engagement campaign. If you're looking at people who haven't touched your emails in a year, you need to be asking them, do you want us to send you emails still? Because of this recycled email address spam traps. Like there may be people who haven't spoken to you for 5 years, and if you're still emailing them, and you've got a large enough volume, you can almost guarantee one of them is going to be this. And then you've got invalid email addresses. These are typos or fake addresses. So a good example, and one we know of, is Rocket Mail. I'm not sure if you know Rocket Mail. Has anybody heard of them? So they were bought by, I think, Yahoo in the end. I think there's still a proportion of. We know that Ricket Mail is owned by a third-party spam list. So they own that domain. So whenever certain email addresses are sent to Ricket Mail, that will be an inbox that's managed by a spam list, and you will be put on that spam blacklist as a result of emailing them. So because we know that, we immediately suppress, even before it's got to the server, anything that's sent to Ricket Mail. We do this as much as we can as an email service provider. There are literally, thousands of these things, very hard to keep track of. So we need, obviously, our clients to be keeping their data as hygienic as possible as well to avoid these kind of things. Anything like gmail.com or hotmail.com is the sort of thing is likely to cue these kinds of spam traps as well. So something to keep in mind if you're doing things like acquisition campaigns on Facebook and you're not cleaning the data once you've got that acquisition data before you put it into engaging networks, and you get a lot of bad domain or bad mailbox bounces, any of which could be a spam trap. That will affect your deliverability more than possibly anything else. And this, of course, is why data hygiene is so key. We talked a bit about churn rates and attrition and re-engagement already. You really want to have, and this is something you could set up in marketing automations, a regular ask of people who fulfill certain criteria, who haven't touched your emails. So you can set up a marketing automation, for example, for anybody that's in engagement score 10 or 11 as a supporter profile, and then just email them on a regular basis saying, do you want to still be sent emails? If they click no, then take them off the list. Perhaps if they don't click anything, then you can keep them. But if they actively are saying no, then they shouldn't be on your list.
How good is it the deliverability for that group of people without the
they will get the same deliverability as other people. So typically you'll have. So good question. Typically, like a provider is going to treat you in the same way. But it varies again. So many of those people are people who it's like an old account, which hasn't been touched for 2 years. Maybe it's not just that they're not interested in your emails. Maybe it's just that they don't use that email account anymore. And that's likely to be a spam trap. So it will vary. But in terms of, if they're a legitimate account, your inbox placement for them will be the same as other people potentially. However, I think where you're doing asks for adding people to contacts and being added to certain folders, at the same time, that email is going to be much more likely to end up in the right places for a user who has specifically asked them to do that, if that makes sense. We were talking earlier about being added to those lists. If a large volume of people are effectively doing the same thing and doing that add to contacts, then other people who haven't asked for it are more likely to have it in that position. However, the people who have specifically asked to be added to like a primary folder are much more likely to have them add to a primary folder. If you see what I mean? Other than that, the inbox placement is going to be relatively the same as like a normal metric. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Looking at data hygiene here, the real gold standard in data hygiene is double opt-in. I bet most people here don't use them. They're going to bring down your conversions, obviously, potentially, although double opt-in conversion tends to be quite high. But you're never going to get a bad email address from somebody who's physically clicked on something in their inbox, because that's a legitimate email address. They won't make a typo mistake, etc. So that's the gold standard. Where there might be issues, if you are using opt-in management from an external CRM that's not engaging networks, Salesforce, for example, there can potentially be issues with reverse logic. So, are you making sure that when you're exporting to Salesforce and then re-importing, that you're not getting a no from one side that turns into a yes at the other? It does happen. I've seen it happen. It seems pretty obvious not to happen, but it's a very confusing area of data. And I don't envy the people who do it for a job, if I'm honest. So acquisition of data is another item, something we've touched on. Paid for lists, something you have to be very cautious. Make sure you're getting that list from the right people, because you will get spam traps. Typos from submission. If you're doing lots of social media marketing, for example, they may not have email validation. Something worth checking. I told you about how we monitor things ourselves in terms of discard addresses like Ricket Mail as one example, but third-party data cleaning services obviously do this for a profession, and they, when you send out to a third party, they will have their own list of things that they know are spam traps, and they will automatically get rid of that, and they will send you back a list that's got 200 emails taken off it that they know are going to get you into trouble. So possibly worth investing in, depending on how you're acquiring your data and how much time you have to test it yourself. This is something worth reading. So I've given this a full read. It talks about what I've done, but like spoken to you about largely, but in a lot more detail. This you can find online. More detailed breakdown of spam traps. It'll give you much more detail on data hygiene than I just have. And it's really good tips for maintaining an effective subscriber list. These 3 items alone are pretty much, in the changing landscape, the 3 biggest items for making sure your inbox placement is as healthy as possible. This is free, it's online, it's a PDF doc. It's a good read, actually. Do check it out. And a little more technical, I'll spend as little time as possible on this, just so we can leave like 5 minutes for questions. SPF records are something you need to make sure are set up. When you're sending from your domain, you need to make sure that that domain is set up to send through our servers. You need to make sure that e-activist.com is accepted in your SPF records to send mail. We do that for all of our clients. Providers obviously have it as a fairly essential item for ASPs to be sorting out. As part of your onboarding, we usually set this up. But if you're using, for example, a different sender domain, if you're just using a different subdomain, you need to make sure that that is also set up with SPF. Quite critical. We do DKIM signing as standard with our emails. That's another key item for ESPs. Consider your sender email addresses and sender rep. We spoke a little bit about using webmaster or info at, typical administrative addresses. Try to use a personal email address instead. That's a good practice. The return path sender score, you can look into this. Return path and sender score, you can just look them up online. They'll give you a score out of 100. Now, Hotmail, for example, are a big provider that use sender score. They use return path. You really want to be making sure you've got scores in the 90s to make sure you've got, to show you, and it'll show you what sort of complaint rates you're getting across the industry for your emails as well. Really sophisticated tool, very widely accepted. You can just chuck your domain in, and then you should see the stuff that through that domain which has been sent through eActivist, and then you can get back your score. And we can help you with that too. Similarly, third-party DNS blacklist checks. We spoke a little bit about Spam House, Spam Cop, big ones in the industry. These are operated separate from the providers, but they do provide data back to the providers. You can do what's called an MX lookup online with your domain, and it will show you whether you are on any of these blacklists. We can show you how to do this. We also regularly check this ourselves for you. So we are regularly checking these two items. We also have feedback loops set up for all of our servers. This monitors complaint rates, you can find out how to set them up yourself. Gmail Postmaster tools don't have a feedback loop service, but we similarly are also signed to that. So we check both those items for you as well. And email testing services such as Email Analysis and Litmus, very good for very accurate rendering of all of your emails across all different devices and platforms. Again, something we'll be adding to our software.